sportsmen and women put their bodies through a lot of physical exertion over their careers, usually spanning a number of years. In the course of time, they get used to a particular kind of rhythm, and their bodies also adjust as needed. But with sports focused on pushing the limits at all times in pursuit of records, the argument can be made that sports people are usually better prepared physically and mentally to deal with underlying health conditions. Same may not apply to spectators of sports events, those who are always filled with some kind of expectations and having to deal with anxiety most of the time. With the physical body generally inert and not keeping pace with their heart, which coordinates anxiety and expectations in the human body system, there's always a chance that those underlying health challenges could manifest more easily, most times with devastating consequences. Just this week, that appeared to be a case when a number of Nigerians lost their lives while watching their national football team, the Super Eagles, play South Africa at the African Cup of Nations. To have a conversation around this, we are now being joined by Dr. Joy Oshun, a consultant cardiologist at Reddington Hospital here in Lagos. A warm welcome to you,
Thank
Dr.
you for
Oshun.
having me.
Thank you so much. Off camera, I was asking you if you are a football fan because what is happening or what has happened during and after the semi-final match between Nigeria and South Africa in Ivory Coast at AFCON is probably something that has never happened before. As at the last count, we've lost 5 people, including a youth corper. All of them as a result of the fact that they were watching the football, the match, and just like that, heart attack. Was the match the issue, or are we dealing with something that many people are not dealing with, are overlooking, their health and underlying conditions? What really could have happened given the 5 cases between here in Nigeria and the gentleman who also passed on in the stadium in Ivory Coast on Wednesday? What could have gone wrong?
Okay, thank you for your introduction. Well, first of all, I would like to say that I have not personally independently verified the reports that these deaths were primarily due to the fact that they were watching the football match. However, we are privy to the news and we've seen the reports on social media as well. So usually when there is sudden death, one thinks of death as a result of cardiovascular disease. Blood supply to the brain and blood supply to the heart. Was there any disruption or interruption in blood flow that could have caused a sudden compromise in their well-being? So I would like to say that comments that will be made should not be taken solely as a substitute for medical consultation. If you feel unwell or feel that you may have a heart condition, the best advice is also always to seek a proper consultation with a qualified medical personnel in your designated healthcare facility. But having said that, we need to talk about prevailing cardiovascular diseases in our community, which we are well aware of. Hypertension being one of them. And there are other cardiovascular diseases like heart conditions. Patients who have abnormalities in blood flow to the heart, disruptions or a reduction in blood flow to the heart are susceptible to sudden cardiac death. So there's a difference between a heart attack and a cardiac arrest.
There's a difference?
Yes, there's a difference. So a cardiac arrest is when the heart is unable to beat properly to maintain life. So the heart stops beating adequately to maintain life. While a heart attack is when there's a sudden disruption in blood flow to the heart that prevents the heart from carrying out its function, which is to supply blood to the other organs of the body.
Are there any warning signs? Are there any warning signs in terms of like how you're feeling, so people would know that, okay, there's something wrong here? Because, you know, oftentimes you're like, oh, I don't feel well, I have a headache, maybe I have malaria. But are there any warning signs, any things that people should look out for in terms of when it comes to cardiac arrest, like you've said?
Okay, so, yes, there are warning signs people should look out for. So first of all, for example, the sensationalism surrounding this situation we're discussing has brought this to light.
Yes.
are you mentally prepared to put yourself through an emotionally tense situation? If you don't feel mentally prepared, then you should probably take a step back. And do you have an underlying health condition that may put you at risk? Have you ever checked your blood pressure, your blood cholesterol? So warning signs, it will include things like a chest pain, a pounding in the heart, feeling dizzy, feeling unwell in general, or sudden weakness of any part of the body. But sudden cardiac death can occur within a short period of time. That's why it's called sudden cardiac death. And the symptoms may have not been pre-existing before the onset of the event.
Really?
So, yes. So patients need to, or the general population is advised to be aware of their general well-being. Have you ever done a wellness check? Do you know if you are hypertensive? Do you avoid risky behaviors like excessive smoking, alcohol, and stressful situations? So there are many ways in which preventive measures can be taken to avoid increasing one's risk of cardiovascular disease and fatal consequences.
One of the people, the Nigerians that were reported dead, one of them happened at the stadium. I think two other ones at the viewing center. Is part of the problem, does it have to do with what people can do? Is it CPR, you call it, to resuscitate people who suddenly, experience, sudden attack? Is that something that Nigerians do not know how to deal with it? And do we have enough education and advocacy around that?
I think healthcare education and advocacy can be improved upon in our environment. It's important for the relevant authorities to formulate policies and practices that will make public viewing centers and areas of the communities where there will be a large population of people at any given point in time safe. So like you said, there are certain people in the community who are trained to provide immediate medical attention, and they are trained in what we call the basic life support. Okay. So it would be a good idea for viewing centers or stadiums, public places, to have people who are skilled in the provision of basic life support and provision of what we call automated external defibrillators. Because if there's a sudden abnormality of heartbeat, that can be detected by the automatic device, which will advise whether a shock is required or not. So, however, people need to be trained, people need to be more aware, and the right policies need to be put in place.
Okay, so I was asking specifically about CPR,
Okay.
for example. I mean, could any of them have been saved if people knew what to do at that point in time?
Okay. So there's something we call the golden hour in medicine. It's just a window during which, if appropriate intervention took place, could have changed the outcome, could have saved the life, and CPR is one of them. Okay. So early recognition that somebody is in trouble, the cardiovascular system has been compromised. Usually the patient might slump or first clench their chest and appear not to be responsive. So the people surrounding need to be alert and recognize that something has gone wrong. And then we also, so the second chain of survival is initiating early appropriate cardiac compressions, which is the CPR. So not everybody is skilled in this, and I think this is one of the opportunities to raise awareness on public health issues. People need to be skilled in the ability to provide CPR. So yes, there are measures that could have been taken immediately which could have changed the outcome, but I cannot speak to specific cases that took place.
But can you break down what CPR means and how ordinarily it ought to be administered?
Okay, so CPR is called cardiopulmonary resuscitation. It's actually just one of the steps in the chain of survival. So it involves chest compressions, and chest compressions have to be done at a ratio of 30 to 2 breaths given. So it's quite technical, and it has to be taught using demonstration and using mannequins and showing people examples of how it should be done. But the chest has to be adequately compressed at a ratio of 30 compressions to 2 breaths given. And like I said, it's the second link in the chain of survival. So it's not only the second link, and it should really continue before the appropriate health care personnel arrive on scene. So I will still advocate and say that it is advisable for the relevant health authorities to guide us, to guide the public. Do we have guidelines? Are we allowed to provide CPR on site without training? So I do not want to say anybody can just, administer CPR to somebody who has slumped. What do the guidelines say? What are the Lagos State guidelines? What are the Nigerian recommendations?
Because I wanted to ask you if there are specific trainings and certifications, because I know that when I went to school in my university, you had to do specific trainings for lifeguard work, and CPR was one of the certifications that you took. And a close friend of mine, her dad slumped, and somebody walking by who was certified in CPR saved his life. And so this is something that I've always thought about in terms of our public health. Are there specific certifications available in Nigeria? But also beyond that, because there might be a lot of fear right now going on because of these cases around the game. How common are cardiovascular diseases? How common are these cardiac arrests in Nigeria? Is it common for 5 people to die in one day from cardiac arrests, taking into account our population size?
Okay, so for your question on the CPR, yes, there are courses, there are certification courses on CPR. That's why I mentioned that it's not advisable to just comment that anybody on the street should perform CPR. You have to go through a training process and be certified to a certain degree. So there's basic life support and there's advanced cardiovascular life support. So usually the basic life support is what is advisable for general people who may not be healthcare professionals to avail themselves of some knowledge on how to provide immediate rescue medical intervention in such scenarios where people might slump. Okay, I don't know if that answers your question. Now, in terms of how common is cardiovascular disease in Nigeria, cardiovascular disease is common in Nigeria, and the burden of cardiovascular disease is actually as high as 10%. So about 10% of Nigerians die from cardiovascular disease.
10%?
Yes. So the sensationalism surrounding this march is what brought this to light. You said, can 5 people die in one day? It might be more than that number of people dying from cardiovascular disease daily. As much as 7 million people worldwide die from cardiovascular disease every year. So yes, it is common, and one of the prevailing health conditions in our country is hypertension. The prevalence of hypertension is as high as 31% from recent studies of the population. And out of this 31% of hypertensives, less than half of them are on treatment. And out of the population on treatment, only about 1/10 of them have their blood pressure well controlled. So we can't talk about this discussion without mentioning hypertension. It is a prevailing medical condition in our society. It is common, and it does lead to fatal consequences when not properly treated. It might not be carried on the news, it might not be highlighted or spotlighted, but it happens commonly every day.
Can you explain more hypertension, what it looks like? So
hypertension is elevated blood pressure. So remember we said that cardiovascular disease is disease involving the heart and the blood vessels. So hypertension is relates to the pressure that the heart exerts when it pumps blood towards the blood vessels. And it should be at a certain limit. When it's above, persistently above a certain range, we say this patient is hypertensive. So one advice would be for people to know themselves, know your numbers. What is your blood pressure? What is your blood sugar? What is your blood cholesterol levels? Have you ever assessed your BMI?
Yeah.
Do you know your numbers? Are you well? Are you actually well? Have you availed yourself of the opportunity to attend a wellness clinic? Apart from cardiovascular disease, we need to also look at people as a holistic being.
Yeah.
There are other issues, prostate disease, cervix disease. But talking about sudden death, we need to have people's risk factors assessed and analyzed so that people can have an individualized and tailored approach to their well-being. Okay.
All right, tomorrow is the Super Bowl in America. Possibly the biggest, sporting event in the U.S. In 2010, just before the Super Bowl of 2010, the American Journal of Cardiology, published a report, and I think the New York Times carried it too, saying that the heart attack rates rise during Super Bowl. Last year at the Super Bowl again, 2023, the same thing was highlighted, whereby doctors were warning of cardiac emergencies, among fans of the losing teams. Tomorrow is Super Bowl. What you find in America is that practically everybody is talking about it, the sort of thing that we are talking about, that if you are predisposed to certain things, you have to watch it. This game is intense. There's emotional involvement, in it. And if you have underlying, factors and stuff, be careful. Maybe that's one thing that we don't do well here. Sunday is the final at AFCON. Nigeria will be returning to face the host country, Ivory Coast, again. Do you think that the way that Americans are talking about the relationship between a major sporting event and a rise in potential, cardiovascular emergency cases is also what we should be talking about, given that 5 people lost their lives as a result, reportedly as a result of the fact that they were watching the semi-final matches? That's something that should be encouraged here.
Yes, I think that's a practice and policy that should be encouraged, not only verbally, but also in print. Educational programs should be like this, for example, to raise public awareness. If you have an underlying health condition, you're already under some emotional strain. You add to that tension from a sport that you're very attached to. It might not be a good idea to do that at that time. You can watch a recorded version instead of watching it live. So those are some of the measures that can be taken. Have you assessed your health recently? Are your numbers under control? If you know that your blood pressure is not under control, or you tend to have panic episodes, panic attacks, you're not very well able to control your anxiety levels, then you might want to do away from stressful situations. So I agree with you that those are some of the measures that the health policy-making authorities should take to advise the public on the possible rise of cardiovascular events following stressful or anxious events like a high-intensity football match that a lot of people were anxious about the outcome.
But is it a wonder, though, that it is Nigeria who eventually won the match that lost 5 people? I've been trying to comb the internet and South African, media to see if there has been any, untoward or casualties recorded in South Africa. I haven't found any. I'm not saying that, something like that could not have happened. But we won the match. And from the report so far, it's either when South Africa was awarded a penalty against Nigeria, or when somebody missed a penalty, that all of a sudden there was a snap and then the person slumped. But we were the ones that won the match eventually. But we were the ones that lost people. Is this, again, I return to that question, is this so much about the intensity of the match, the importance of the match, or the fact that maybe more Nigerians actually need to be a lot more attentive to their health?
I think it has to do with the attentive aspects. I always tell people, if you expose a group of people to the same level of stress, be it physical or emotional, not everybody will react the same way. So people need to be more attentive about their health. If you think you're well, are you actually well? Have you gone to certify that you're actually well? And if you know you have a pre-existing medical condition, try not to put yourself at risk. Listen to your body. If you start to feel your heart pound, you have a headache, you feel dizzy, you start to be tremulous or sweating all over, then you should know that you have probably exposed yourself to a level of stress which your body is complaining about. So it might not necessarily be that such events did not take place in South Africa, but because football is very dear to our hearts, it was a very meaningful match for a lot of people. So I would consider that emotions were high. And also speaking about the fact that less than 0.5% of our hypertensive population are controlled, you would expect stress to be one of the factors that can raise blood pressure. And raised blood pressure can cause sudden disruption to blood flow to the brain, which can lead to sudden death, can expose the patient to abnormal heartbeats that can cause sudden death, sudden disruptions to blood flow to the heart, which will cause a heart attack. So people need to be more attentive about their health status.
You know, you said before about smoking, like smoking too much can be one of these risk factors. But are there any other behaviors except for exposing yourself to these very stressful, high emotional situations? Because I would say that I know a lot of people are still going to want to watch that match, but are there other things that people can do in terms of protecting yourself, and also younger people to do in terms of preventing yourself from actually getting hypertension? Is it something that's just in our genetics, or is it a behavioral, or are there certain risk factors?
Yes, so talking about smoking, let me correct that. It's not smoking too much, smoking at all. So there are no safe levels of smoking. Just like recently, the WHO has also advised that there are no safe levels of alcohol consumption. The risk starts from the first drop. So the risk also starts from the first smoke and also inhalation of secondary smoke. So let's clarify that there's no safe levels of smoking. So there are other things that can predispose an individual to cardiovascular disease, an unhealthy diet, a diet that is not high in fiber or that is too high in saturated fats, a very high consumption of salt, a sedentary lifestyle, not getting to exercise enough. But I almost also say that if you want to exercise, please get your exercise prescription from your doctor, because different forms of exercise are not for everybody. Don't just wake up one morning and decide you want to join a marathon, without having a medical check done on yourself, and you should know your level. So always take advice from a qualified healthcare provider before you embark on an exercise regimen. So cholesterol levels, so things like underlying diabetes, cholesterol level, kidney disease. So those factors predispose people to cardiovascular events or sudden cardiac death. So preventive measures would include watching your diet, adopt a healthy lifestyle, eat a high fiber, low saturated fat diet, be active. As much as possible, try to avoid stressful situations. I say as much as possible because in some environments, their day-to-day lives are stressful. So you have to be intentional about how you react to stressful situations, and then listen to your body. If you see that your body is having difficulty handling what you're putting yourself through, then you probably need to take a step back and go and get yourself checked out. If you have symptoms like chest pain, don't just put it off. Say, oh, they said I have ulcer. Don't just put it off, because the pain of ulcer can also mimic heart pain. Go and get it checked out. Have you ever done an ECG, what we call an electrocardiogram? Do you know if your heart is beating regularly? So these are things that can be done if you avail yourself the opportunity of attending a wellness check or a wellness clinic. So yes, so those are some of the preventive steps that can be taken. So no smoking, no alcohol, be active, eat right.
So WHO that once said that equivalent of 2 bottles of beer a day would be considered as average is now saying no alcohol at all. Is that what they're saying?
So previously it was said that 3 to 4 units of alcohol, which is equivalent to what you said for men, and 2 to 3 units for women were considered safe. And
it's no longer
probably
safe.
have some. So because it's difficult to weigh the balance of the beneficial effects of the phytochemicals and antioxidants in alcohol with the fact that alcohol has been classified as a group 1 carcinogen in the same category as smoking, as exposure to asbestos. So that statement came out in January 2023. There are no safe levels of alcohol consumption. The risk starts from the first drop.
Really?
So you have to provide your patient with, so like I said, everything I say if you don't consider this as a substitute to medical advice, I have to put that disclaimer. Always speak to your healthcare provider. You have to provide the patient with information. Guidelines are dynamic. Medicine is dynamic. Guidelines and recommendations do change, like you've highlighted previously. They said take this amount. Now they're saying don't take this amount. But the guidelines can also differ in your geographical location. So your doctor can advise you. I've seen some statements, the way they phrased it is avoid alcohol, but if you must, then stick to this quantity. But this is what the WHO has published recently. No safe levels.
No safe levels of alcohol. And no safe
So
levels of smoking.
I don't want that to be a contentious. So we can avail ourselves of the write-ups and educate ourselves better. But nothing trumps having a proper medical checkup.
Yeah, absolutely.
And getting to know yourself. You think you know yourself, but you need to get to really know yourself and how well you are indeed.
You said earlier that a feeling of an ulcer can mimics like maybe a cardiovascular issue. Are there any other things that you feel like people may just be like, oh, this is no big deal, like chest pain, like you said, that you think that people should pay more attention to? Signs that you should pay more attention to.
So pain, chest pain, especially if the pain that started in the chest, suddenly you're feeling it at your left shoulder tip, you're feeling it get to your jaw, then you should be concerned that this could be chest pain of cardiac origin. Other things that you should watch out for, if you find out that suddenly, previously you could climb a flight of stairs and you'll be fine, but now you climb a flight of stairs, you get tired easily, you get short of breath, you have to rest, you're panting, your heart is pounding in your chest. Those are signs that you shouldn't overlook. If you've noticed over time, anyone has noticed over time their legs begin to swell up, they seem to be retaining more fluid than usual, then those are signs that shouldn't be overlooked. Cough. So if a cough has persisted for long, don't just put it off to, oh, it might be the weather, it's just a flu. If it has persisted for over 2 weeks, you should be concerned. That's looking at the fact that you might not have sought medical attention in the first instance.
Okay.
So do not ignore a cough that has persisted. Do not ignore swollen legs. Do not ignore chest pain and pounding in the heart, which is medically called palpitations. Dizziness.
Yeah.
If you feel dizzy or have problems with vision, suddenly it appears the vision has been impaired, or there's a weakness on any part of the body, a sudden weakness on any part of the body. Those are symptoms people should not overlook. So it's always important to seek proper medical attention when you feel unwell.
Of all the 5 cases reported, I'm interested in the case of the young man, a youth corper that died. You know, the funny thing about football is there is what is called sudden death in football. You know, when you are done with the first 5 penalty kicks, and then the next round of penalty kicks, once you lose and the other person wins, it's called sudden death because you won't proceed. And I find that rather funny, you know, that the football world will allow that, you know, usage of sudden death in describing, you know, an otherwise beautiful game. So for the case of the copper that had, of course, a clear case of sudden death, put us through what could have happened in such a short period, will it just be like a sudden cry? Will it just be like, oh, a goal missed, and then you expressed so much disappointment, and then something snaps? You know, what level of shock can knock out a life in the young boy?
Okay, so I do not have all the details or the facts surrounding that particular case. For instance, I don't know the age of the person involved, but I think
under 30, being a youth
yes,
copper,
but yes, being a youth copper. But I think the important thing to note is that sudden death is possible in a young person. It is possible. So there are certain inheritable conditions that can predispose an individual to sudden cardiac death. And that's why I mentioned, has everyone done an EKG? Do they know what their heart rhythm is like? So abnormalities of heart rhythm, even hypertension. Hypertension can occur in young people. Stroke can occur in young people. There's a phenomenon called stroke in the young. So it is possible for a young person to have sudden cardiac death from a variety of reasons. Was the person entangled in an altercation? I do not know the facts surrounding that case. Was there any trauma before the sudden death occurred? So we need to look at the specific details of that scenario before we can postulate what could have led to that particular individual's fatal outcome. However, sudden cardiac death is possible in young people.
That's something to ponder on, isn't it?
This one,
I mean, you know, because beautiful game, that's what football is called. Sunday is almost, I mean, tomorrow is Sunday, everybody's looking forward to it. Those who can be at the stadium where, you know, there's a lot of activities, will either sit down at home or at viewing centers, or even viewing centers organized by government. And what you find in many of the viewing centers is that you're eating maybe fried stuff, you know, you're drinking, and you feel that you are relaxed and you are enjoying the football. But from all you are saying, some will be smoking, of course. You know, you have unhealthy diet on the one hand, you have alcohol, maybe high volume of it, and at the same time, you're tense. Those are predisposing factor to somebody whose heart is not too good?
Yes, those are predisposing factors. But out of all those things you mentioned, the one that you can think of that can cause sudden death would be a binge. If a high volume of alcohol concentration goes into the system, it can predispose to abnormal heartbeats, what we call a cardiac arrhythmia. So that could predispose somebody. And also if somebody has an underlying structural heart disease and consumes alcohol or a high load of salt in the snacks or the preparations that they are enjoying while viewing the game, coupled with the stress. So it could be multifactorial. Sometimes it might not be only one single factor. But I can't say that just what they had at the viewing center could have caused the event, but it's multifactorial. It's also important if there was a predisposing underlying medical condition. Some people are not aware of their cholesterol levels. They are unaware, or they are aware and choose not to adhere to the medical advice. So it's important for us to change our mindsets. First, know yourself, and then how do you take what information you receive? Everybody has a fundamental human right to choose what they want to do, but you can only educate, encourage, give people the right information so that they can make an informed decision on their well-being.
Definitely. And is there do you have any information on these CPR classes or certifications that, in case somebody is watching and they're actually interested, do you have any information on how people can go about that?
So I would say that the information is available. The resources are available. So it's just one click away. If you go on the internet and Google BLS courses, basic life support certification courses, or CPR training programs. That information can be derived from the web.
Out of curiosity, why do we have a situation whereby half of those who are on hypertension treatment do not, have their situation under control? Why is that the situation in Nigeria?
So the statistic is that about, so we said about 30.6% of, there's a prevalence of hypertension as high as 31%, out of which only 12% are on treatment. So 29% of these people are aware they have hypertension, the rest are unaware. And out of these patients who are aware, 12% are on treatment. So that's already an under-treated population.
Is it expensive? Is it?
So when dealing with patients, you have to take into cognizance the fact of your environment. Environmental factors. Is there access to proper medical care? Is there access to educational information, health-related educational information? Is there a willingness to believe what the healthcare practitioner is saying to you? Because you have to weigh religious, cultural factors in the environment that you find yourself in. You have to be respectful and be mindful of where the patient is coming from, but also encourage them and give them the recommendation. So you can't force treatment on someone who declines treatment.
All right. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Joy Oshun. I mean, it's been nice having this discussion with you. Some of us will still watch the match on Sunday, but we'll try and be guided.
And the Super Bowl.
And the Super Bowl. But we'll be guided by what you have said. Yeah. And of course, we hope that Nigeria wins tomorrow.
There's no safe level of alcohol. That's what I take away from today. Thank you so much.